As Hashem, today's daf is Masechta Menachos Daf Tes, and we're going to start from Daf Ches Amid Beis, about 6 lines from the bottom. So the Gufa, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, we learned before, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Shlach Shlamim Sheshachtam Beheichal Kesherin. The carbon shlamim, which can be slaughtered anywhere in the Azara. If you went into the sanctuary and shechted it, ksherin's ksherin. So let's see our temple. The carbon shlamim is slaughtered anywhere here, right? Anywhere outside of the courtyard, right? In this cat. But if you walked into the heichal, where the aron and where the shulchan is, and you shechted the animal there, so that's not a good place. I mean, that's not where it's slaughtered generally. But the Yevid, it is kosher. That's what the Gemara says. Why? Shenema, Torah first tells us that you should slaughter the animal at the opening of the sanctuary. But what's more holy? What's more of a holier place? The holier place is inside the building, inside the sanctuary. So I don't want to have the tafel, the secondary part, more stricter than the main part. If the main part is the building, right? If the main part of is the building itself, so if I could shech outside the building, certainly I could shech in the building, as you can see in the picture. So that's the Gemara's thing. So Gemara says, Meisvi, let me ask you a question. Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira said, and this is a question against Rabbi Yochanan. Menayin, how do I know she'im hikifu goyim es hazor? If the goyim started bombing, sending missiles into the courtyard, shakahanim nichnasim lahechel, then the kahanim could go into the building like a safe room. They could eat the carbon chatas there and the leftovers of menuchas. You know that the kahanim are supposed to eat kachim in the courtyard, right? So the question Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira had, how do I know if there was bombs falling all over the place over here in the courtyard that they could enter the building and eat kachim over there? So the Gemara says, because we have a pasuk, Talmud Bavli, we have a pasuk, the kodesh kodeshim teichelenu. We go to Amid Aleph, that they could eat the carbon chatas in the main sanctuary. That's a pasuk. So now the question is, based on Rabbi Yochanan's logic, that you could always say a kal v'chaim if you keep it outside the building. Certainly, you could do something in the building. So the halam alikra. Then why would I need a pasuk to teach me that you could eat the chatas in the main building? Lema. The pasuk already says by the carbon chatas, b'chatzar oil moed yachlua. Eat it in the courtyard, right? In the courtyard of the sanctuary, you could eat it. And now I'll make a kal v'chaim. If the Torah says you can eat it in the courtyard, so certainly you could eat it in the main sanctuary. So I wouldn't want to say that the courtyard is more stricter than the main place. That the main place you can't eat. So the question that the Gemara has is, what do I need a pasuk to teach me that you could eat the carbon chatas inside the building, inside the sanctuary? Why don't I make a kal v'chomer and say, if you could eat outside the building, you could eat it inside the building? And where did Rabbi Yochanan use that logic? He said that if you could shecht outside the building, certainly you can shecht inside the building. So the Gemara says there's a big difference. Avoida, to do a service like shechting, I can make a kal v'chomer. The oven ovid b'mokem rabbi, a person could do a service in front of his master. Arminim, we're going to say shlo yehei tafel chomer min ha'ikar. Then I could say, if you could do the service on the outside of the sanctuary, certainly you can do it in the inside of the sanctuary, because we won't want to say that the outside is more stricter than the inside. So then you can have a kal v'chomer. But that only works by shechita. Achila, but eating, I would say that just the opposite. It's not nice to eat inside the sanctuary, because that's more closer to the Eibishter. And she'ein odom oichel bimkoim rabbi. A person doesn't eat in front of his master. It's not nice to eat your sandwich in front of your boss. So therefore, I would think that you're not supposed to. So Talmud, the cost of the Korah, it's only because the pasuk said it's okay to eat the carbon chatas. Then that's how I know that you can eat the carbon chatas in the building. Oh, loy cost of Korah, but if the pasuk didn't say that, lo yeh tafel chaf min hikra layamrinan. I wouldn't say that you could eat it in the building, because it's a big chiddush that I could eat the carbon chatas inside the sanctuary. That's why I need the pasuk b'chatzar oil moed yachlu. Itmar, new topic. Back to carbon mincha. Remember, a carbon mincha, we what do you do with it? Here's the ingredients. You put oil. Let's follow the steps. You take a kli sharis. Let's call this a pan. You put oil in a pan. Here's the picture. Then you add your solus flour, okay? And then you do, what's he doing? Belila. He adds most of the oil, mixes the flour with the oil. Look how he's mixing it with his hands. And then yitzika. Yitzika means you pour the remaining over the entire mixture. Now that you have this oil, what are you going to do? You're going to put frankincense on it, right? A little frankincense. It's little pieces. Then the kohen brings your mincha to the mizbeach, to the southwest corner of the mizbeach, southwest, and then he does the kamitza. Correct? You see how he does the kamitza with his hands. Supposedly, that is one of the hardest services to be done in the Beis Hamikdash. It's a hard service. It has to be precise, and you can't have any of the levina in your hands. And then you put it into a kli sharis. So one of the things is called belila, mixing it. So the Gemara says like this: Itmar, we have a teaching. Belala chutz l'chaymes hazara. If you went out of the Beis Hamikdash and did the mixing of the dough with the oil outside the Beis Hamikdash, so Rabbi Yochanan Amar Pesua. Rabbi Yochanan said you just invalidated the whole carbon mincha. Rish Lakish Amar Keshera. Rish Lakish says it's kosher. Just bring it back inside and that's fine. Because as long as you didn't do the kamitza, according to Rish Lakish, it's still kosher. It doesn't matter if you bring it outside. It says like this. Rish Lakish Amar Keshera. Rish Lakish says it's kosher. The ksiv yotzak oleha shemen v'nosan oleha levina. The Torah says first you pour a little oil, and then you add the frankincense, and then the Torah tells you then you bring it to the kohen, the kamatz, and he does the kamitza. So mekamitza ve'elach mitzvahs kuna. From the kamitza and on, then the kohen, it has to be always in the Beis Hamikdash. Limit, teaches you al yitziko belila, the pouring of the oil and making the dough, the oily dough. Shekisher and Bazar doesn't have to be a kohen. A Yisrael could do that preparation. And mid the kahuna loibaya, since you don't need a kohen to do it, panim nami loibaya, you don't have to be totally inside the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash doing this process. That's what Rish Lakish holds. So according to Rabbi Rish Lakish, if somehow you took the mincha out into the wall over here and you did the mixing and the oil over there, it's still kosher. But Rabbi Yochanan said, no, you have to always keep the mincha and the making of the mincha inside the courtyard. And that's what Rabbi Yochanan says. Pesula, Rabbi Yochanan says it's possible. Kivin the asiyasa mekliyu, since you're preparing it using a kli sharis, a kli belonging to the Beis Hamikdash, so need the kahuna loibaya. I grant you that you don't need a kohen to make the mincha, panim miyazbaya, but you have to be inside that room. You have to be inside that courtyard. Anya kavasa de Rabbi Yochanan. This is a brisa that agrees with Rabbi Yochanan. But lala bizar shera. If a non-kohen prepares the mincha, it's kosher. But chutz l'chaymes hazara, if you prepare it outside the walls of the Beis Hamikdash, pesula. Now, I want to emphasize that the Gemara doesn't mean that it's permitted to walk out. Even Rish Lakish doesn't, technically permit you to walk out of the Beis Hamikdash with the flour and the oil, make it, on Harabayas. He only permits you to be, somewhere in the walls of the Azar, not in the courtyard, where you're not outside, but you're still not inside. That's how they learn shot over here. And that's what Rish Lakish says. So I guess you could do it under this, wall over here. and somehow, according to Rish Lakish, you can make it underneath here. You can make the mincha, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, it would be possible. Next Gemara. In Itmar we learned mincha shechasra koydem kamitza. Let's say you made the mincha, and before you did the kamitza, before he did the kamitza, here's the kamitza. Before he did the kamitza, some of the flour fell down a drain and was lost. So now it's missing some of the shirayim, the leftovers. So Rabbi Yochanan says, bring more flour from your home and fill it up. Make sure you have the shear of Isar and whatever the shear is of the mincha. Rish Lakish says, too late. Once some things flour fell out, that's it. You have to throw out the whole thing. Don't bring any more from your house and fill it up. The mincha that you made is now as possible. Rabbi Yochanan maybe you could bring more flour and make up the loss, because kamitza kavala, what's going to make this a holy mincha is only after the kohen does kamitza, then the leftover is holy. Rish Lakish is very strict. Don't bring any more from your home and fill up the keli. You dropped it. Kedushas kli kavala. You already were makadosh the mincha by using a holy vessel. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rish Lakish, if any of this flour was lost before you did the kamitza, you got to throw the whole thing out. According to Rabbi Yochanan, the kamitza makes it a holy mincha, not preparing it, and therefore, if something fell, if some of the flour was lost, you just bring from your house and fill it up again. That's what Rabbi Yochanan said. So now, the Gemara asks a question. Rabbi Yochanan asked the question against Rish Lakish. Chosar lug. If some of the oil fell out, what oil are we talking about? The Brisa says that the oil of a mitzora, right? That you have to use a lug oil, and before you smeared it on the left hand of the mitzora, if some of the oil fell out, so it's not a lug anymore. Im ach lo yatzak, if it's prior to you doing the yitzika, pouring on the hand of the mitzora, some of it was lost, yimal ena, you could make up the loss by bringing more oil. And we don't say, oh, once this oil was in a keli, it's too late. So this question is against Rabbi Rish Lakish, because this brisa says if something spills out, so you fill it up again. That's it. You bring more. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, this makes perfect sense. If some of the flour fell on the floor, bring from your home and fill it up again. And Rish Lakish says no. So this is a good question against Rish Lakish, because this brisa seems to concur with Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara says Tiyuf the Rish Lakish is refuted. Itmar, we learned another teaching. This is a little bit different. What happens after you did the kamitza? After the kohen did the kamitza, okay, he did the kamitza, put it into a vessel. Remember, you needed another kohen to hold the vessel while where you put the kamitza in. Let's say the kamitza now is in this vessel. Prior to the kohen bringing it, onto the mizbeach, right? Some of the flour fell out. Now there's a problem. Some of the flour fell out. You were mekadesh already the keli. You were mekadesh the kamitza. What should you do with the kamitza anymore? So should you bring it onto the mizbeach? So the Gemara says like this: Shirayim shechasru, the leftover that you lost some of the flour, bein kamitza laktar, between the kamitza, prior to the kohen burning it onto the mizbeach. What do you do with the kamitza? Should you continue burning it on the mizbeach? Rabbi Yochanan says, makter koimitz aleim. You continue burning the kamitza on the mizbeach. But Rish Lakish ein makter koimitz aleim. You don't bring the kamitza anymore. Once you did the kamitza, and then some of the leftover of that mincha spilled out on the floor and fell into a drain, so that's it. You don't take the kamitza and burn it on the mizbeach. The whole thing is possible. So the Gemara explains that this is aligned with another machlokes of Tanoim. So Aliba de Rabbi Lezer Kuliyam Maloi Peligi. According to Rabbi Lezer, that we're going to learn in a minute, everybody, Rabbi Yochanan and Shlakish would agree that Rabbi Lezer's opinion would be is that you could be maktir the koimets. Their argument is, what would Rabbi Yeshua hold in this case? Okay, so let's see. What's the machlokes? The Tanam we learned in the Mishnah, nitmu shiriyaha, nisru shiriyaha of the shiriyah. Let's say you were makar of a carbon, okay? Let's say and you shechted a carbon and you shechted a carbon, right? And then the whole meat became tamei, right? So what does Rabbi Yochanan hold? Let's say that it became tamei, or let's say the meat somehow got burnt or lost. So kamidus Rabbi Lezer kashera. Rabbi Lezer holds it's kosher, right? Because even though, what should you do with this rika? Sprinkle the blood, even though you don't have any meat to eat. So let's say a person shechted a carbon chatas, and now the meat became totally disqualified because a sheretz landed on it. Rabbi Lezer says just sprinkle the blood. Fine. Well, Kamidish Rabbi Yeshua Pesula. Rabbi Yeshua says don't sprinkle the blood because if you don't have meat to eat, don't sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach. You require that the owner bring a new carbon. So, man the puzzle. So, according to Rabbi Lezer, certainly it's good. If you're missing some of the flour, you could do the kmitza. Because Rabbi Lezer says even if you're missing all the meat, you could do the zrika, right? And you could do the so certainly, and you could do the but so certainly you can do the kmitza and throw it on the mizbeach. So Rabbi Lezer says it's kosher, but Rabbi Shua says it's puzzle by the meat. So man the puzzle, the one that says by mincha, it's also puzzle if you lose some of the shirayim, some of the flour falls out. He holds directly. That's Rabbi Yeshua's opinion. I like Rabbi Yeshua's opinion. Umam the machsher, the one that says it's kosher, which is Rabbi Yochanan, he's going to tell you that there's a big difference. Ad kan lekama Rabbi Yeshua hasam. When did Rabbi Yeshua says that the whole carbon is puzzle if the meat became tamei, elodi lo ishtayar, because there was no meat left. So what are you sprinkling the blood and there's no meat left? Aval heicha di ishtayar. If there's something left over, right? Let's say by our mincha, only a little bit of the flour fell out, but most of the mincha is still intact. I feel Rabbi Yeshua Maidele, even Rabbi Yeshua would agree that you would do the kamitza because there's still some of the mincha left. There's only a little bit of the flour was lost after the kamitza. So that's what the Gemara is saying. The Tanya we learned in the Brayso, Rabbi Yeshua says like this: Kol hazvachim shebetayra. Any carbon in the Torah, right? Shenishtaye behem kazayis basar kazayis chaylev. Let's say it became tamei, but little kazayis of the meat did not become tamei, or a kazayis of the fats did not become tamei. Okay, so you have what to give the mizbeach, or you have what the kohen to eat. Then zoyrek hadam. Then even Rabbi Yeshua would agree you sprinkle the blood because there's something left over. Let's say you have a half a zayis of basar and a half a zayis of fats, which is not enough for a human and really not enough to give on to the mizbeach. Then you don't sprinkle the blood because you're sprinkling the blood of something of a carbon that there's nothing left of anymore. But even in a carbon oila, even if what's just remaining is afila kachatzi zayis basar kachatzi zayis chel, even if there's a half a kazayas of meat and a half a kazayas of fats, so since you combine them, because the oila everything is brought on the mizbeach, the meat and the chelev and the fats, so then it's as if you have something left over of the carbon. Then zoyrek is adam. You could sprinkle the blood because the oila is totally on the mizbeach, so you can combine the meat with the fats. Bottom line is that even Rabbi Yeshua would agree that you would sprinkle the blood if there's something left over. So Rabbi Yochanan says same thing by a mincha. If there's some flour left over, then you could do the kamitza and burn it on the mizbeach. Then the Mishnah, the Brayso continues with a mincha. Rabbi Yeshua says, if you have a mincha, then even if the entire mincha is intact, you don't sprinkle the blood. So wait a second, a mincha doesn't have blood. So we go over days. Mincha, man amaya vidite. What's doing with a mincha? Mincha doesn't have blood. Amar Papa says minchas nesachim. We're talking about the special mincha that's brought with certain carbonates. which is if there was, let's say the whole meat became tamei, but there's the minchas nesachim left over, still you wouldn't sprinkle the blood. Since it's part of the carbon, it's like the carbon, and there's something left over there. Kamash Malan, that's not enough. You need meat to be left over, or you need fats to be left over in order for Rabbi Shua to say you sprinkle the blood. Bottom line is, Rabbi Yochanan seems to agree with this idea that he would say that you would sprinkle the blood, and he would agree to the idea that if some of the flour spilled out, you would be able to continue do the maktir, the kamitza on the mizbeach. But Rosh Lakish says, man the apostle, what does Rosh Lakish hold? Shan Achol by mincha is different, because the Amakrab, the pasuk says, the Heirim hakoyim min ha-mincha as askarasa v'iktir mizbecha. The Torah tells you that the kohen should separate the kamitza and maktir the entire kamitza from ha-mincha, the mincha. Unless you have the full shirayim left intact, only then could you be makter the koinitz. But if you have less than the shirayim intact, if some of the flour spilled out, there will be a drasha that tells you don't be makter the koinitz. And that's the opinion of Rish Lakish. The idach, what does Rabbi Yochanan do with that drasha? Minha mincha, mincha shaysik var. Doesn't mean that the mincha needs to be intact. At one time it was complete. Even though now some of the flour was lost, that's okay. You could still be makter the mincha. So now the Gemara asks a question. Rabbi Yochanan asks against Rish Lakish. Eisrei Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan asks a question to Rish Lakish. Ad shaloi pirka nifras halechem posel the ein makter olav es bezichin. As we saw by the bezichin, we saw by the here is the showbreads, right? They move the showbreads. Here's the person. They removed the showbreads off the table every Shabbos, and they were maktir the levoina that was in these two ladles that was on the table. Let's say before you remove the showbreads, one of the showbreads became tamei or fell off. So then you wouldn't be maktir the ladle, because you didn't do the kamitza. You weren't maktir the kamitza. You didn't do the kamitza yet, because the kamitza is like removing the ladle. But after you remove the ladle, let's say the kohanim took the showbreads off the table. Now it's off the table, and then another kohen took the ladles, and then one of the breads got lost or fell off and became tamei. So then you still would be makter the ladle. So what do you see? That's Rabbi Yochanan's question. Rabbi Yochanan's question is, v'im misha pirka, if you remove the breads off the table, nifras lachma, one bread, one of the lechem upon him became tamei, let's say, or destroyed. Halechem pasel, you don't eat the bread anymore, but umakter olav as a bezichem. But since you did the kamitza is in the ladle, you do continue and makter the kamitza. So we see from this brisa that even if some of the mincha is lost, some of the shirayim is lost, you still continue to do and makter the kamitza. So this is a great question against Rish Lakish. Amalei, so Rish Lakish is going to answer you, how money that brisa is Rab Lezer. That goes according to Rab Lezer, who, and you can't ask me about Rab Lezer. Rab Lezer is always holds of the opinion that you could still always be makter the kaimitz. You could always be sprinkling the blood, even if everything was lost. So Amalei, Rabbi Yochanan said, I'm telling you a complete Mishnah. And you're telling me that Mishnah goes according to Rab Lezer? If that Mishnah really went according to Rab Lezer, Rabbi Eliezer, my ear nifras. What do I care if just one bread got lost? I feel the sorrow of Ovid Nami Machsha. Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion, he has such a light opinion that even if there's nothing left over, if the all those breads were burned, so to speak, you would still be makter the koimitz. So that Bryce is definitely Rabbi Eliezer. That Bryce is Rabbi Yeshua. And we see from the din is that Rabbi Yeshua will be of the opinion that even if a little bit is lost, if there's something remaining, you could be makter the koimitz. So the Bryce must be going, the Mishnah must be going according to Rabbi Yeshua. So this was a great question Rabbi Yochanan asked Rish Lakish. Ishtik, and Rabbi Shlokish was silent. Says the Gemara, another 2 minutes and then we'll stop. Mamai Shasek. Why did Rabbi Shlokish be quiet? Leimalei Tzibur Shani, Hoyel the Ishtrei Tuma Legabei Ishtrei Chaseris. So Amar Ravada Bar Haba Zoyse Meres Hisarin Kibal Mum Dami Be'ein Bal Mum Betzibur. In other words, you couldn't have, Rav Shlokish could not have answered the question the Gemara asked. Why did Rav Shlokish say simply the reason why you continue Makter Bezichim, because these are public minchas, so to speak. The showbreads belong to the tzibur. And we find things are suspended by the tzibur, that if the tzibur is tama, you do the service anyway. So if you're missing one of the showbreads, maybe you can bring the showbreads too. You could still bring the bezichim. So Alder Bar Ahava says that only works by tuma. Only tuma is suspended by a tzibur. A balmum, let's say an animal that's missing a limb, so you wouldn't bring a carbon tzibur if it's a balmum animal. So same thing over here. If it's missing one of the showbreads, you wouldn't. If one of the showbreads became lost, you wouldn't bring the bezichim. So the tzibur answer would not be a good answer. Let's skip to Omer Rab Malkiah. Rab Malkiah says, and here we'll end. Tanachada, we learned in one brisa, mi salta, that you have to use shem chosra kolshu psula. The Torah tells you that you have to have the entire flour. If you're missing any of the flour, the mincha is possible. Mi shamna, the oil, shem chosra kolshu. If you're missing any of the oil, it's possible. But tiny idach, then we have another brisa. By neseres mina mincha, the mincha has to be intact. Whatever is left over from the mincha, while it's intact, then is eaten by the kohanim. Prat le mincha shechasra v'shechasra kumtza v'shalehiktem levainer sal klum. Let's say a mincha that's missing, or it's missing a kaimitz, or you didn't be makter of the levaina, so then the mincha is possible. So the Gemara asks, Trey Kara'i b'chaseris lamali, why do you need two psukim to tell you that the mincha lost some of its flour? It's puzzle. Lav, doesn't it mean to tell you chad lemincha shechasra kaimin kamitza, to teach you that a mincha that's lost before the kamitza, if you lose some of the flour, don't bring from your house anymore. The mincha is puzzle. The chad, I want to teach you the shirayim shechasru ben kamitza l'aktara, and to teach you that even between the kamitza and the aktara, if some of the shirayim fell out, if some of the flour fell out, don't do the kamitza. The whole thing is puzzle. Utruf did Rabbi Yochanan b'tarvayu. Now both statements of Rabbi Yochanan is refuted from these brises that seem to say that as soon as flour falls out of the mincha, as soon as any flour falls out of the mincha, whether you did the kamitza, whether you didn't do the kamitza, it seems to say that you have two psukim that tell you that the whole mincha is possible. Answers the Gemara, that's not what the brise mean. Loy chad lemincha shechasra koydim kamitza, he may be basing your mal. One just tells you that if some of the flour fell out, then you still have to bring more flour from your house. And only then you could rekasher the mincha. But if you didn't, then the mincha is possible. The chad, and one pasuk teaches you, the shirayim shechasr min kamitza l'aktorah, the afal gav, the makter koimitz aleim. Rabbi Yochanan only said that you makter the koimitz. If some of the shirayim if you lost some of the flour before you were makter the kamitza, so then you makter the kamitza, but oisin shirayim asula achila, then you're not allowed to eat the leftovers. So what you would do is you just be makter it and then burn the rest. You don't eat the leftovers. The boiler, the divrei yom shirayim shechotzer by kamitza l'aktara makter koimitz aleim. According to this was the question. They asked the question in yeshiva. According to Rabbi Yochanan, that if some of the flour fell out after you did the kamitza, before you were makter the kamitza, oishin shirayim mahem b'achila. So after you do the makter the kamitza, can you eat the leftovers? Amaziri amakra v'haneseres v'lay neseres min haneseres. Rabbi Yana amem be'amincha mincha shoysekvar. Both seem to say, Rabbi Ziri, Rabbi Yana bring psukim that say that although Rabbi Yochanan permitted that after you did the kamitza and some of the flour fell out, you are makter it on the mizbeach, but the kehanim don't eat the leftovers, because we have a pasuk that says that only the leftovers they eat, but not a leftover from a leftover. So if you lost some of the flour, then the kehanim will not eat any more of that mincha. Okay, we'll stop over here. Okay.